Perfect. So we're discussing the experiment where we added the invite members option to the assignees dropdown. And this is the original issue. And this is the tiny change that we actually made, right? And it's this dropdown here, actually. So I'm not seeing it now because I guess I'm not part of the experiment. I think the experiment is now on 50%.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, okay. And yeah, the whole idea was to have this option sticky down there, right? So even when you scroll to the users, it's always there. And if you search for someone and there's no matching results, it's even more noticeable in a way, right? And yeah, we wanted to do this because we were focusing a lot on increasing the invitations to GitLab. And this was just the first part of it, where we showed this invite option to the GitLab users that actually can invite new members to GitLab, right? The part that really interested us, and I think we'll get to discuss here as well shortly, is what happens when we show this to all the GitLab users, even the ones that can't actually invite, but maybe they could request an invitation, and then that invitation would then be confirmed or allowed or whatever we want to call it, right? So yeah, this is the design. I still have the prototype here. Does it still work? It should, yeah. It's still in Sketch because we're not using Sketch anymore. Yeah. And this is the result. Yes, so this was the MVC where we just linked to the settings members page. What we envisioned further down the road was it would trigger that invite a member model, right? So it doesn't need to go to a separate page. You could basically invite new members to that project that you're in from any page, like an issue, in a merge request, whatever, right? That was the idea, basically.
Just to clarify, that is
Sure.
something that the invite modal is something that we hope to have live in 13.10. So that we'll be able to add that to this experience.
Nice, perfect. Yeah, so we can do a follow-up experiment, I guess. Or would we just upgrade the experience? What do you think?
Personally, I think we just upgrade the experience. I think we're pretty confident in that it's a better user experience to do it as an update.
Yeah. Okay, and I'll stop sharing now so that you can share and talk us through the results of the experiment.
So here, I'm gonna pull up the tracking issue and the dashboard of the results.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next steps here. So when we looked at the actual funnel of users that were in the experiment, we only saw a 0.1% click-through rate on users that were shown the invite option in that dropdown to actually clicking to invite. Really, that's obviously quite a low click-through rate, or for event count. So this is raw event totals. When we look at user count, so per user, it goes up to 0.13. So this tells us, because people are assigning multiple issues, so they're seeing this multiple times. So in one of the tracking issues, Matej had some really good points around that. This isn't an experience that users are going to do all the time, where they're not constantly going to invite from this location, but it's kind of an added benefit. And we don't have user ID tracking on front end events, so we can't tell this, but one of our hypotheses is that new users or new groups may be more likely to find this valuable because they're still actively inviting their team, versus an established group may only use this on an occasion because they have the majority of their team in their account, but it's still an added benefit. Now, with this 0.1% and 0.13%, you'd think maybe this experiment wasn't successful, but the important thing to do here is to actually look at the overall experiment versus control and look at what is the total invite rate for groups in the control that did not have this experience versus groups in the experiment version that did have this experience. And we actually saw a higher invite rate for users in the experiment versus the control. So when we look at the number of namespaces with 2+ users divided by the total number of namespaces, this tells us that we had a 2% increase in the rate at which namespaces in the experiment or groups invited users than and then namespaces did in the control. So to me, this tells us that this is a good experience for our users. They're not going to do it all the time, but it is definitely adding value to the overall adoption rate of GitLab.
Yeah, and that was exactly the idea, right? Early on, where someone is starting to adopt GitLab, especially focused on groups, we want to make it as easy for them to invite new users. That was exactly the idea. I was expecting that existing groups wouldn't be using this as much. So it's really, we don't have data to prove that, right? So new groups versus existing groups, probably.
Not with the way that this was originally rolled out, since it went out to all kind of groups. If we wanted to test that in the future, we could limit the experiment to, let's say, new groups, people just coming from sign up, to test a hypothesis around it. Does it improve the new user experience? But since we don't have user ID tracking on front end events, you know, we can't look into this experiment and understand who the users are.
Of course, yeah. Okay, so maybe it's worth in a future experiment to do that, just so that, I mean, it's a valuable learning for us. It's an assumption right now, but if we can confirm it, that would be a really good learning for us. So the groups early on are much more likely to invite new users, and the easier we make it for them, the more they do it, basically, right?
Yep, and my part of my thinking around this too is as well is that I think we're adding to the user experience. You know, we know it's not an action they're going to take all the time, but at the right moment in time, it makes it easier for them to invite somebody, especially now that we're going to implement the modal. It means they won't be removed from their issue. They'll just have the modal appear, they can invite the person and then go back to work. So I think we're going to further improve the experience with the modal. And Matej, one point that you made was, one of our questions was, what do non-admins think about this experience? So if we think about our overall users on GitLab.com, the vast majority of them are not admins. Admins make up a small percentage of our users, and that's the users that are really in this funnel. So this experiment is still live. What we're doing is showing that same experience of click to invite from the assignee dropdown, but there's a message that says this feature isn't quite ready for you yet. Just to understand, are non-admins interested in the ability to potentially request somebody to be invited? This could be a really good piece of work for us in the future, because it unlocks potentially a ton of user invites in the future, or even access to trials or upgrades where team members can request their admin to do a particular action. And this experiment was just turned on the other day, but so far we're seeing a 1.27% click-through rate for non-admins clicking that invite option. So that is, you know, 127%. Did I do that math right? I forget, but
yeah, the original one was 0.01.
Yes.
I think it's, if you have one chart about this one. Yeah, it's that one, I think, right?
Yeah, because it's I believe this is unique users. This one, so it's equivalent to this chart here.
Okay.
So for admins, we had a click-through rate of 0.13, and so far on this very new experiment, we have a 1.27 click-through rate for non-admins.
Interesting. So that's a lot higher, actually.
It's a lot higher. So I think this adds to some of our work that we have in research around what should this experience look like for non-admins? How can we provide them with an experience where maybe they can request to their admin that a colleague should be invited? And then what should that experience look like for the admin saying, you know, a person on their team has requested a colleague that's not in GitLab be invited.
Yeah, exactly. And this is something I started to think a while ago, and this is why we're running this experiment, right? Where we basically, after they click this invite members link, we show them a model where we'd say, hey, this feature is not available yet. And there was some pushback from some people. It kind of sucks to launch an experiment like that, right? Where we're not actually delivering anything. We're just running an experiment to learn something. But I think the possibility of learning here is so huge that in this case it was worth it, because as you said, now we can think about, asking non-admin users for free trials, asking non-admin users or non-admin users asking admins for invitations. And this will also have, I believe, an impact on the early stage adoption of groups when they start adopting GitLab, basically, right?
I couldn't agree more. And I think it's one of those experiments where it's a really interesting research moment for us. And, we would never roll this experiment out to 100% to show non-admins this ability to invite with just a modal saying the feature's not ready. Yeah. We have it out to 20% right now. I think we'll keep it at 20%, just see if this 1.27% click-through rate kind of holds. And then we can turn it off. And this is a really good learning for us. And to your point, justifies, a big bucket of work for us to invest further into this like non-admin kind of request experience.
Yeah. It was exactly because of that, because I knew that this kind of work would be huge, right? You need to think about the whole experience. What is it like when someone asks an admin user, hey, I want to invite this person. What does the interface look like? What is the email notification like? All these things, right? It's not a simple thing. So we better be really sure that our users want to do that before we invest the energy and time in developing.
And on top of that, we also have to think of the other side of the equation of what does the admin experience look like when they're getting these requests? And how do we think about an admin of a large instance that may get many requests? So there's a lot of work there, but I think this experiment so far is very much justifying that it is absolutely worth our time to invest in it.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing that.